When Hollywood legend Morgan Freeman steps onto a live talk show, he expects a respectful conversation. However, the host takes a different approach, asking intrusive and downright disrespectful questions. Instead of losing his composure, Freeman responds in a way that stuns the entire audience. His calm, yet powerful words shift the entire mood, leaving everyone in complete silence. This unforgettable moment proves exactly why Morgan Freeman remains one of the most respected figures in the industry. The atmosphere in the studio was thick with anticipation. Every seat was filled, and millions of viewers were tuned in from their homes, eager to hear the wisdom of a man whose voice had narrated life itself. At 86 years old, he was still sharp, graceful, and held in the highest regard. As he stepped onto the stage, his deep and familiar voice greeted the audience. Cheers erupted. Some people even wiped tears from their eyes. But as he settled into his chair, something felt off. The host, Vanessa Clark, was known for her bold, ruthless, and often disrespectful interview style. Morgan had done countless interviews before, but this one would be unlike any other. Leaning forward, a smirk on her lips, Vanessa spoke with a silky yet sharp tone. "So, Morgan," she began, her voice smooth yet piercing, "at your age, do you ever wake up wondering if today might be your last?" Silence. The audience's smiles faded. Morgan didn't even flinch. He simply folded his hands in his lap, meeting her gaze with quiet strength. A storm was brewing, and Vanessa had no idea what she had just triggered. A low murmur swept through the crowd. Some exchanged glances, others shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa let out a soft chuckle, as if her question was harmless. But Morgan remained still, his wise and knowing eyes locked onto her. She wasn't finished. "You've played God," she continued, tilting her head. "But let's be real. You're just a man. A very old man. What's it like knowing your time is almost up?" Gasps. A woman in the front row clutched her chest. Morgan let out a soft sigh, shaking his head. He had seen arrogance, cruelty, and disrespect throughout his decades in Hollywood. But this was something else. Vanessa was enjoying herself. The camera zoomed in on Morgan's face. His expression remained unreadable, but inside, he was thinking, reflecting. This moment wasn't just about him. It was about every elderly person watching. Every soul who had been cast aside, disrespected, treated as if they no longer mattered. And so, when he finally spoke, the world listened. Morgan leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "Miss Clark," he said, his voice steady yet piercing, "have you ever sat beside someone as they took their last breath?" Chills. The question sent a shiver through the audience. Vanessa blinked, caught off guard. "Well, she stammered. But Morgan didn't let her finish. "I have," he said softly. "Many times." The room was dead silent. His voice carried the weight of 1,000 memories. "I have held the hands of dear friends as they whispered their final words," he continued. "I have watched great men and women take their last breath. And do you know what they regret most?" Vanessa swallowed hard. "They never wish for more money, more fame. They wish they had loved more, forgiven more, appreciated life more." The camera panned to the audience. Some had tears in their eyes. Morgan's gaze locked onto Vanessa. "You ask me what it feels like to be old," he said. "It feels like a privilege denied to many." The room erupted. Applause filled the air. Some stood, clapping through their tears. But Morgan wasn't finished yet. And for the first time in her career, Vanessa Clark had nothing to say. She sat frozen, gripping her cue cards as if they were the only thing keeping her grounded. The weight of Morgan's words lingered in the air. A woman in the crowd wiped her tears. A man in his 70s clenched his fists, as if remembering someone he had lost. Vanessa forced a laugh, but it came out shaky. "Well, Morgan," she said, attempting to regain control, "you're quite the storyteller. But let's be real. People your age, well, they start to become irrelevant in Hollywood, don't they?" More gasps. The tension in the room was suffocating. Morgan leaned back, rubbing his fingers together, a habit of his when deep in thought. He looked at Vanessa, not with anger, not with offense, but with pity. Then he spoke. "My dear," he said, his voice thick with wisdom, "let me tell you a story." The audience leaned in. Because when Morgan Freeman speaks, you listen. "There was once a young man," he began, his voice steady, rich with emotion. "He was full of dreams, full of life. He thought the world would always be his. But time humbles us all." Silence. One day, that young man grew old. And he found that the same world that once cheered for him had moved on. They no longer saw him. They no longer listened. A woman in the crowd covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. But one night, Morgan continued, he sat by his window, watching a storm roll in. And he realized something. Vanessa swallowed. He realized that even when the sky turns dark, even when the world forgets the sun is still there. Still burning. Still shining. Just behind the clouds. A sniffle. Then another. Morgan's eyes softened. "So, my dear," he said gently, "irrelevance is a word the world places on those who have lived long enough to carry wisdom. But wisdom never fades." Vanessa's lips parted, as if she wanted to respond, but she had no words. The audience sat in stunned silence. An elderly man wiped his face with a handkerchief. A young woman held her grandmother's hand, gripping it tightly. People weren't just watching, they were feeling. Vanessa cleared her throat. "That was quite a speech, Morgan." He gave a small smile. "It wasn't a speech, Vanessa. It was the truth." She exhaled sharply, desperate to regain control. "All right, Morgan," she said, forcing a smirk. "Enough wisdom. Let's talk legacy. What do you think people will remember about you when you're gone?" The room went still once more. It was a cold, direct question. But Morgan? He just chuckled softly. Vanessa," he said, shaking his head. "You're asking the wrong question." Vanessa frowned. "What do you mean?" Morgan leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The question isn't what people will remember about me when I'm gone," he said. "The question is, what will they remember about you?" A collective gasp. Vanessa froze. This was no longer an interview. This was a reckoning. And for the first time in her life, Vanessa Clark felt small.